morning, everybody, and welcome to this IUA market briefing. It's great to see so many on the call and people coming through as we speak. Now, today's session is part of our Developing Technology Monitoring Group series of presentations where we look at risk management and developing tech. And today's session, we're going to look at combating cybercrime, the threat intelligence. And we've spent an awful lot of time, I think, in our underwriting groups looking at underwriting cyber risk, how it's underwritten, where it's underwritten, use of exclusions. But we're going to take a step or two back from that today and kind of look at some of the risk management techniques and try to mitigate some of those risks and look at sort of future gaze about what sort of trends we may see coming through. And to help us to do that today, I'm very pleased to welcome Kate Grayson from CFC. She's a cyber threat analyst and is going to spend, I think, 20-30 minutes looking at some of those trends, some of the work that she's doing at CFC. As part of that, I suppose, pre-claim, almost pre-inception risk mitigation. We have some time, we will have some time for Q&A, so feel free to use the Q&A or chat functions in Zoom. And I think we'll pick those up at the end of Kate's presentation. I should also note that we will record this session, and Kate's kindly agreed to share the slides, so those will be presented to people post-meeting. And with that, Kate, I'll pass over to you. I think we have your slides on screen, so pass over to you and we'll pick up in the Q&A afterwards. Great.
Thank you so much, Chris. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be talking with you here today. And as Chris has introduced me, I'm Kate. I work on the cyber threat analysis team at CFC. And we are still a fairly new team in our inception. But we were created to answer essentially 4 questions. What causes claims? Can we predict them? Can we help detect clients at risk of some of these events that cause claims? And can we help clients remediate those prior to the claim? And I'm here today to talk to you about the threat intelligence that we're using at CFC and how we think we're actually changing the cybercrime landscape with our work. So in order to understand how we got to where we are now, we need to kind of have a think about the evolution of our cyber policies. Threat intelligence has had really such an impact on the insurance industry. It's kind of now part and parcel of our policies. So let's have a think about how we got there. So you had cyber version 1, which just offered coverage in itself. And for cyber insurance as a new concept, that was quite unique in and of itself. But cyber attacks at that kind of time were fairly uncommon. And it led to people wanting more out of their policy than just money afterwards. What were they, after all, meant to do in the kind of event that an attack actually happens to them? People want that kind of industry-led experience to have them guided through the incident. They also wanted to understand what it really means to have better cyber posture. At the time, there's kind of a lot of ideas floating around about what really makes a difference to cyber attacks and how to prevent those happening in the first place. And yeah, bearing in mind as well that cyber is still like a bit of a buzzword at that time, and still is to some extent. And it can be really hard to find security consultants that actually know their stuff. So at CFC, not only do we kind of have trusted relationships with industry partners and we've personally vetted their products, we've actually got one of the biggest team of incident response consultants with many years of experience between us. So as well as being able to kind of provide these additional features on our policy, you had this like team of people who are sort of ready to hand, and that was cyber version 2. But we know in the last few years really that threat actors have really pulled up their socks, and the severity of attacks has unfortunately really crept up. The cost of an attack is much higher per incident, so although they're less common, they're much more severe, and quite frequently put businesses out of business. Which led a few of us in our incident response team to think, well, what can we actually do to prevent those kind of claims in the first place? And this is how we came to what we think is the feature of cyber, proactive cyber and threat intelligence. So proactive cyber is kind of a chunk of the puzzle, really, that our team works on. And as you can see, it happens actually before a cyber attack has ever occurred. And it's usually at the inception date of our policies, and it goes on through the whole policy period. So we know that a really simplistical but kind of typical course of a ransomware attack is to gain access to systems, perform reconnaissance, get higher user privileges, administrative privileges, steal data, and then delete backups, and finally perform that kind of end goal, which is usually the encryption, and make their ransom demand. So at a really high level, our team retroactively looks at causes of claims to see if those companies have or had identifiable characteristics that led to that attack. And then we look at some of our current clients to work out if they show any of those characteristics, and if we can intervene and assist at a point that maybe a threat actor actually gains access, or even before. So if you're listening, you might be thinking, gosh, that sounds like a big project. How are we doing this? And if every cyber insurer and every security practitioner could do that, why haven't they already? And why haven't we just solved cyber? But that is because it is quite an imperfect science. We think we've got parts of the secret formula right, but it is difficult. And to prove that point, I'd like to kind of divert a bit and talk about cyber risk rating technologies. So for people that are kind of unaware of what that is, this is a branch of services that analyze the external facing security posture of a company, and based on what they see from that, they come up with a rating for that company. So this tends to be like a report style list of things. They can use that score to benchmark with competitor companies, and they can use this report to see maybe what they're doing well, what they're not doing so well on, maybe systems that might be vulnerable or actively compromised, or things that are exposed to the internet that maybe shouldn't be. It's sort of our opinion that these kind of cyber risk rating systems are really good starting points for small, medium enterprises, which maybe don't have any or maybe one dedicated IT personnel, or perhaps just one kind of systems administrator. And IT and security are very different specialties in themselves, and it can be difficult to find somebody that specializes in both. So an SME is not always going to have that. And so that company probably needs pointers in the right direction, which a cyber risk rating report can give them, and that's great. But over time, we've learned that there are a lot of kind of problems with this approach. So for the biggest one kind of being that not all vulnerabilities are created equally. So you have a vulnerability or exposure that might be more or less severe than others. And cyber risk rating systems don't always account for that so well. So we do have some insecurity rating systems. So there's something called the CVSS score that we use to rate the severity of something. But that doesn't always kind of account for individual company circumstances. And on top of that, it doesn't account for kind of claims data, and neither do those cyber risk rating systems. So, for example, in our experience, we have never knowingly seen that maybe an expired SSL certificate has actually led to a claim. But we've found through some of the cyber risk rating systems that we've looked through that they're rated as quite high priority items. So it's a bit of a kind of red herring. It will lead companies to focus on things that are good on the whole, but aren't making a kind of meaningful impact to make them a less attractive target for attackers. And on top of that, some remediations are maybe not externally visible. So that might not be accounted for in the rating method. And mapping the externally facing infrastructure of a network is a lot more difficult than it actually sounds, and it again is quite an imperfect task. So often they kind of rely on what's known as domain name server registrations, or DNS registrations. And companies called DNS registrars keep a record of what IP address is owned by what entity. But these are quite hard to maintain, and they might be outdated. So as we move to using cloud infrastructure more and more, infrastructure isn't always dedicated to one company. So you might have a server that is actually hosting domains for hundreds of companies. That's been commonly seen in our experience. So as you can tell, lots of misattributions happen, and the data from those platforms is not always that accurate or that useful. So to tackle that last part in particular, CFC actually has a dedicated team that work on mapping out networks. So at the point of policy inception, we ask our clients for their primary domain. So you can see our example here is smithandco.com. And we can work out what kind of infrastructure this domain is actually hosted on. So is it some type of kind of more dedicated cloud infrastructure like AWS or Azure? Or is it something slightly more larger scale like DigitalOcean or something like that? And it's also quite easy, and there are publicly available tools to work out the IP address that hosts this domain. So there are tools that you can use to do that. From here, we can start to work out things like, does this company actually own a range of devices that have IPs within or around that kind of range of this IP address? Or are there any related subdomains that could relate to other services? So if you own a Microsoft Exchange server, a mail server, your subdomain might be mail.smithandco.com. And so once we've built up a kind of picture of this network with questions like that answered, we can talk about how confident we are about certain aspects of it. You know, in this case, we could say, oh, well, you know, this part is sort of shared hosting. It might not just relate to them, it might relate to other companies, but we'll keep it in our records. And then we can start to kind of look for the characteristics we talked about earlier. So what services are running and what ports are open and things like that can start to tell us a bit more about their security posture. And this is what we call passive scanning, which is great. It doesn't require any input from the client because we've kind of just garnered all this just from their domain. It doesn't disrupt their day-to-day operations. Hopefully they shouldn't really notice anything is happening at all. And it's not intrusive. We're not exactly stealing data from them or anything like that. It's just what we can see about them. So we've tackled kind of part of the problem here, but again, if we think about our cyber risk rating example earlier, you can't really capture true exposure from the outside. So in this example here, you can see that we could capture something like if the remote desktop protocol is exposed to the internet, or if a server has not been patched, or the software on that server has not been patched to the latest version. We know some of those things are key indicators to claims. So we know that exposed RDP has pretty much always been one of our key indicators that lead to claims. But there is still this kind of whole world inside here of things that we actually can't hope to capture without input from our clients. So for example, we know that RDP might be exposed, but we cannot tell if multi-factor authentication is enabled unless we had a valid password for a user. So we might notify them that RDP is exposed and they come back to us and say, don't worry, we have actually secured that. It is also difficult to know, for example, if some employees are riskier than others. So whether that is through kind of role type or behavior. So whether they are in finance and they are maybe inherently riskier, or behavior, maybe they are not so educated about cyber and they are slightly more prone to clicking on the links and phishing emails and things. But you wouldn't know that unless you actively targeted them, or you had lists of employees for every single company, which is quite difficult. So this is where we use threat intelligence to prevent claims for those things that we can't really capture. So to do this, we work with a range of sources from providers, including feeds that we've collected from some of our in-house tooling, feeds that we've collected from public sources, feeds from proprietary sources that only we have access to, and even government sources. And these feeds have information about devices that are actually compromised by attackers with malware. So our team is able to kind of, I like to describe it as a sort of Venn diagramming of these feeds with our aforementioned network maps, and we kind of work out which of these clients are appearing in these feeds. And then we can reach out to them in a way that's convenient to them. So that might be our app, which I'm going to talk lightly about later. It might be over the phone if we've got a phone number for them, or it might be over email. So we reach out to them to kind of help them quarantine the affected devices and remediate before things get worse. One of my favorite stories about how our work has helped people in practicality is quite an oldie now, but a real goodie. Especially as you might have heard recently about British Airways and the BBC and the Moveit vulnerability that's happening. The same kind of things are happening over and over again, and you'll see what I mean. So this is about one of our policyholders who really benefited from our work. They were a manufacturing company. They manufactured tools and machinery and had an annual revenue of about 12 million. So although I said that this is kind of repeating now, if you cast your minds way back to 2021, you might remember hearing something across the years about Microsoft and Hafnium and hackers from China. And if you remember this is the first of the major kind of series of Microsoft Exchange server vulnerabilities. At the time, it was identified as proxy logon. There have been many since, specifically in the Microsoft Exchange server space. So there was proxy shell, proxy not shell, proxy oracle, and proxy token, and probably others I don't even remember off the top of my head. But Microsoft, to step back, Microsoft Exchange, as you might be familiar with, is Microsoft's email, calendar, and collaboration platform. And in early 2021, there are 4 vulnerabilities that were discovered, and they allow criminals to get access to the Exchange servers. So Microsoft is a little bit late off the ball, considering they were notified about it fairly much earlier, but they released patches to update those, to remove those vulnerabilities. But for some organizations, it's already too late. They were compromised before the patch was even released and didn't know about it, or they are compromised in that kind of period of time before they're able to patch, but after the patch is released. And that's unfortunately what happened in this case. So because these servers are web facing and they have to, of course, be on the public internet to work because they are mail servers, cyber criminals can use scanning tools, a lot like our team does, to locate servers exposed to new vulnerabilities. So immediately this vulnerability comes out and attackers kind of hop on that. So in this case, a threat actor was able to use a tool to find this manufacturer's vulnerable Exchange server. And as it wasn't yet patched, they were able to gain access. So proxy logon was actually a chain of vulnerabilities. So the threat actor exploits a vulnerability that allows them to pretend to be a much more privileged account. They then exploit 2 further vulnerabilities to install something that's called a web shell, which is just really a piece of code that goes on the server, and it acts a bit like a backdoor. So it allows the attacker to come in and out and execute commands. So thankfully, the manufacturer eventually implements the patches. But if you had already been compromised by the vulnerability, it doesn't remove that backdoor that we spoke about. It kind of expose them, remove the exposure of being compromised further by maybe other attackers who deploy web shells. But that first attacker still has access, unfortunately, through that backdoor. With that backdoor, the threat actor started to move to installing ransomware on their systems. And in order to do that, they download something called precursor malware, which is often used to actually deliver the ransomware. Because of our team's resources in response to the attack, so we're actually able to, at the time, scan our client's internet presence for servers that are not yet patched, and those who had web shells and that kind of precursor common malware. We are able to detect the web shell and the precursor malware on the manufacturer's computer systems. And thankfully, as soon as we were made aware of this, we were able to get in touch with our clients, alert them to it. We were able to get on a call with their IT team, talk them through the issue, and explain how to remove the malware and the web shell safely. And we had a great success on this one. The ransomware attack was foiled, no costs incurred, and we are very certain that they would have had a ransomware attack if we'd not intervened. To kind of loop back to what I said earlier, this scenario is older now, but still relevant. For example, the Moveit vulnerability that everybody is maybe aware of also has same kind of mechanism in which it allows a web shell to be placed on a server, not an Exchange server, but a server nonetheless. And that's something that our team is also involved in. So as kind of mentioned, a really important part of that process is, of course, being able to reach out to clients in a sort of trustworthy, instantaneous way. We do face a lot of barriers, of course, when we go through email. Sometimes emails aren't delivered for various reasons. I think I heard somebody say it's kind of akin to the postal service at the minute, that your email may or may not get there. But on top of that, if they do get our email, they don't always know whether to trust us. You know, it in of itself is kind of a suspicious email to say that you might be compromised, and does tend to get people a bit concerned. And that's why really our response app is incredibly important for clients. So our team is able to, when we find these kind of vulnerabilities, push out details of maybe a vulnerability, an infection, or a compromise to clients so that they can receive it instantaneously. And they, of course, know it comes from us because we are the only ones that can push out alerts through that feed. Also, there are a whole bunch of other tools that are available in the app. So we have functions to ask our team of experts, as you can see here from the Ask the Expert section. If you've got any kind of questions about having good security posture, or even to notify if an incident, if they need help with, maybe it's something completely unrelated, or perhaps it's related to one of the things that we've, the vulnerabilities or compromises we've found about them. Thankfully, we have noticed that the work we're doing has had a very positive impact on our claims frequency. So you can see this dip here in, I think it's Q3 2020, and that is when we started our team's work. So quite a measurable dip here. And after that point, you can see that there is a much more noticeable decline. There is, of course, always periods of sort of busyness for threat actors. So you can see, for example, Q4, funnily enough, every year is usually quite a big spike, because just like us, criminals actually do work for their Christmas bonuses, and we do see much more activity around the Christmas period. Fun fact for you. But our team is working on a constant cycle. So causes of cyber incidents change all the time. So we have to kind of constantly review what causes claims, and we have to re-examine the kind of what do we want to keep reaching out on this kind of information. On top of the fact that causes of cyber incidents change, their impact on our portfolio changes, which is why this is a very up and down kind of line. The ransomware, for example, has been the the type of incident that is the highest severity and has, of course, had the most impact on our portfolio, but other things maybe like business email compromises and funds transfer fraud incidents cost more and more as higher amounts of funds are stolen. So the focus of our work really has to adapt. So as you can kind of tell, our work provides so many benefits for our clients. They get this kind of ongoing monitoring on their behalf, which is free of charge with no setup needed apart from the input of their domain. They get security advice and tips from our expert consultants. They get claims prevention and intervention when they might actually need it the most. And of course, for brokers and insurers, we get market sustainability because if less claims happen, we're paying out less, nobody goes bust, and we can continue to ensure that our work is stable. So to kind of wrap up, if you've got any questions about our cyber offering, you can email us at cyber@cfc.com. Or if you're curious about our app that I've mentioned, because there are quite a few tools that I actually haven't talked about, you can register, you can download the app in the Google Play or Apple Store. And when you are prompted for a registration code after downloading that, use this demo CFC 000, and you can try out all the tools and things available in that. But yes, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Happy to start taking questions if anyone's got any questions.
Thanks, Kate. I think even just for that last bit about getting the app and seeing some of that information, it's well worth downloading. Just a couple of questions here. You kind of looked at how the claims trends are slightly dipping, I suppose, in reaction potentially, arguably, to some of the work that you're doing. What's your view for the kind of the general levels of sophistication of those smaller clients? Are they becoming far more cyber aware, more proactive? Yes,
definitely. I think having worked at CFC for nearly 4 years, we have seen quite a big change. Definitely more companies are reaching out to us with much more useful questions as well. Before it was just kind of, I want to improve my posture, what do I do? But before now it is much more pointed questions around, well, we've already set up this and this, but what can we do that's better? They're starting to build like this real defense in depth approach. And I think we have really good insight into that because, of course, most of our portfolio is those kind of small, medium businesses. So yeah, it is really positive to see. Of course, like we do see the big incidents in the news at the minute, as I mentioned, about British Airways and the BBC. But I think on the whole, things are kind of getting better, touch wood.
What's your view on some of the kind of things like cyber essentials and kind of, I suppose, generic kind of provisions, protections that companies can take place? I mean, obviously your CFC sort of deep dive into the specifics is far more targeted, but do those, are you finding, do you see take up of things like cyber essentials, and do you see the kind of overall value in having those in place?
Yeah, I think definitely. So I think using tools that you can get from providers, I believe it's the NCSC or something that does the cyber essentials. I can't quite remember off the top of my head suddenly. But those tools that are kind of publicly available and free, use all of them, use all the resources that are there and good for you, and use us in the app, or even if you want to kind of email us. Yeah, as I said, we've seen a lot more people kind of reaching out with questions, and we do think it makes a kind of measurable impact.
Sure. And we've seen certainly, as this presentation shows, a greater sort of emphasis at the prevention stage rather than kind of at the claim stage. Has there, because of that, I guess, has been a fall off in the number of successful hacks, and that kind of leads to a follow-up question as well about sort of ransomware. Is it the case that a far fewer percentage of ransoms are actually being paid now?
Yeah, I think I would generally agree with that. Yeah. So I suppose outside of our periphery, it's quite difficult to tell what the kind of true number of attacks that don't get converted to ransoms are, because a lot of companies, of course, choose not to report that they've had an attack for fear of bad PR and things. And my team, especially recently, has been kind of looking into the number of reported incidents on those ransomware leak sites, but that we've seen quite a few issues with that. So sometimes attackers will sort of double post a victim, so it actually looks like they've ransomed more companies than they really have. They probably don't post a lot of incidents. They might have had a successful intrusion, but maybe not a successful encryption. Or they actually did ransomware them, but they don't think there's anything kind of value to put on their site. Maybe they're not, what's the word? I suppose famous really enough to put on the blog. So those kind of, I suppose, blogs and places like that are not really good measures. But yeah, we think generally we have seen a sort of fall off in the number of successful hacks, but not entirely, because of course malware continues to evolve to evade EDR tooling. Yeah, it's just going to be, I think, kind of a constant cycle, really. I think I've got another question here about how we cooperate with the police force and overseas authorities. Yeah, we do share information with you know, the FBI and things. So we've got relations with them. We have relations to the UK kind of police force. We've had some really good success in our collaborations. And yes, information sharing is one of the things that I think really, I think as an industry that we could maybe be doing better at, and we've started to learn that is really important, and we can get a lot of value out of you know, what we do and how we can help others with that. I think at the minute we've been sort of cagey about well, we found this thing, but you know, we don't want anyone to know about it. But we've started to finally learn that I think the only way we're really going to kind of combat these problems is working with authorities and others in the industry.
Chris, you're actually on mute. Would you like to take your microphone off mute?
Sorry, Deb.
Sorry.
I saw a question coming through, but it then disappeared. But one question, Kate, from my side.
Yeah.
Looking at kind of malicious versus non-malicious cyber threat. We've seen obviously an increasing use of cyber attacks as a kind of geopolitical tool. Does that flow through into kind of your assessments and your thinking?
Do you kind of mean I suppose from what we've seen across our portfolio?
Yeah.
So I don't really think so. Of course, yeah, there is the kind of occasional one, but if you think that most of our portfolio really is small, medium enterprises that are maybe not going to be targeted by those kind of attacks, there is, of course, you know, we of course all the time do see big threat groups target our clients, but I think less from the geopolitical side of things. But we do see the effects of those still. So as we mentioned in that graph earlier, we had like the point with the Russia-Ukraine war. It was actually really interesting to see that as a result of the work that we're doing, we saw a sort of drop off. But we also do think that there was a massive drop off after the war, because of course a lot of these attackers are kind of Russian based, and so they're maybe being enlisted to fight in the war and things, or don't have maybe a stable home at the minute. Yeah, there's kind of a lot of theories about the impact that has had on the cybercrime world, but we've sort of seen it, I suppose, restabilize as cybercrime operations get back up and running, which has been really interesting.
Sure. Question here from one of the attendees. Could you give us a quick overview of how the CFC team has reacted to the Moveit vulnerability, and how widespread is it in our is it in our insureds? Has it escalated to ransomware, or is it just data extortion?
Yeah, so I don't think I could probably talk here too much about how widespread it is, but the Moveit vulnerability, yeah, we kind of got some information from open source that this is a thing that is happening. We could immediately see, given the kind of impacts of it, that it can lead quite easily with no authentication and remotely, that it's going to be a big deal. And there are lots of organizations that use Moveit. Maybe they actually have the Moveit software, or they've interacted with other kind of companies that use Moveit. I think it's quite difficult to tell the real impact. So we can tell which of our clients are running this software, but of course you don't know if those companies have interacted with other companies that are using that software and have thus at some point used it to transfer files. So I think in our customer base is probably not a kind of accurate representation of it. I think it's going to have affected lots and lots and lots of companies and individuals, and has already, unfortunately. They have escalated to ransomware. I think a lot of it is data extortion, but the CLOP ransomware group are using it to deploy the CLOP ransomware, which is quite unfortunate. The CLOP ransomware group have been really, in the last year or couple of months even, really on it. So every kind of 0-day vulnerability that's kind of come out, I think I remember as well the paper cut vulnerability that a couple of people talking about. We reacted to that one, and we saw CLOP unfortunately jump on that quite quickly. They've been really on it and are kind of rising up in the cybercrime world.
Further question, a recent article from Poland where a vast number of media sites hit by denial service attack. It didn't make headline news, but are these types of older style attacks still quite common in the UK?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So I didn't hear about that one myself. I'm going to guess that because it was media sites, it sounds like it's kind of more hacktivist related. So, but I think even from the kind of cybercrime perspective, yeah, we do still definitely see DDoS attacks. So a lot of ransomware attackers started to add tools onto their arsenal to really pressure victims into paying. We saw, I can't remember which group it was, it's kind of escaped my brain now, but there were some groups, I think it might have been Conti, that actually called up victims and were pressuring them into paying. They called up their employees and said, oh, your company's got this data and they've allowed it to be leaked. How terrible are they? And yes, we saw also them kind of perpetrating DDoS attacks because there is much more like urgency. If say they've just got they've just encrypted your files and exfiltrated data, but maybe you have backups, you're probably not going to bother to pay unless that data is incredibly sensitive and there's some kind of promise, which you of course can't always get from attackers. But if you're being hit with a DDoS attack at the same time, you're going to be much more likely to pay to kind of just stop that, especially if you're something like a retailer, where that is probably having a very obvious kind of impact on your revenue.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions we had, and we've had quite a few there, so I think it was a very good sort of Q&A session. So Kate, thank you so much for presenting to us today.
Thank you.
I think from our point of view, sorry, from the kind of outside looking in, it's like cyber is still horribly complex. It's sometimes hard to understand, particularly when we look at it from an underwriting sort of aggregation systemic point of view, and then how we adapt policy wordings to that, particularly when you're providing elements of cyber insurance as part of another policy, a crime policy, a professional indemnity, or even things like aviation, marine. So that those things are still extremely complex from the underwriting point of view. But I think it is absolutely essential that at the earlier stage of the sort of risk management, risk assessment stage, that is an enormous help for not only insurers, but also obviously clients and indeed everyone else involved in the process.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. As I said before, we will circulate to attendees a copy of this recording and also a copy of the slides, and Kate's details are on screen. And that just leaves me again just to thank Kate, thank everyone for attending, and Deborah, our events manager, will contact attendees with details of further presentations that our developing technology monitoring group will be undertaking. So thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.